Today I'm talking about a cool piece of tech for creatives called the TourBox Elite Plus, a creative console device that aims to simplify creative workflows. It is designed to select shortcuts quickly with one hand while working on video editing, photo editing and digital painting. I was given the TourBox Elite Plus free of charge by the TourBox company because they asked me to try it out and give my honest opinions for my Art Squirrel blog. As someone who does digital art a lot, I appreciate things that could help me with productivity and ergonomics, so I was happy to give my opinions and evaluate how useful it is for me. When I first lifted it out of the box, I was a bit surprised because it felt slightly heavier than the one-handed keyboards I've tried so far, but it's smaller than them. The TourBox isn't in the same market as one-handed gaming keyboards because it's heavily tailored for creatives, not gamers, but I'm mentioning them because I've tried to use them in a similar way to help with my creative work by using them to access keys from my left hand. I think in terms of price, intended user base and function, it's more comparable to something like a Loop Deck or a Stream Deck. My sister uses an Elgato Stream Deck. She let me know the Stream Deck is designed to be stood up and used as a visual aid rather than using it under one hand like the TourBox. The TourBox device resembles an advanced game controller which can be assigned hotkeys and macros that work with your various programs. Functions can be quickly selected with one hand whilst using your keyboard, pen, tablet or mouse with the other. A TourBox is designed to be used with the left hand but can also be used with the right hand. As a right-hander I use it with my left hand. TourBox Elite Plus fits in one hand, looks functional, beautifully designed and feels sturdy and well made. It is smooth to touch, doesn't have a plastic coating and is made to resist fingerprints and stains. Its appearance is slightly translucent, showing some of the inner workings, which is cool. There are currently 4 different versions of the TourBox console: the TourBox Lite, Neo, Elite and the TourBox Elite Plus. These different versions have different feature sets and price points, the TourBox Lite being the most simplified, affordable version, and the TourBox Elite Plus the most featureful and expensive, and the only one that also works with an iPad. For this review I'm focusing on using it with digital painting and 3D sculpting, as I don't do enough video editing to focus on that aspect of the TourBox. The TourBox Elite Plus works for Windows, Mac OS and iPad. It can be connected using the built-in Bluetooth function or with a USB-C connection. Bluetooth connection can switch between 2 computers or an iPad. It only works with Bluetooth for the iPad. To use the Bluetooth function you must use 2 AA batteries, which came included. If you want to use a cable you need to buy one separately, which I did for the connection to my PC. I got a long USB to USB-C cable. Installation was very simple. First I installed the software from their official website, opened the software and plugged in the TourBox. On connecting the TourBox, the software asked me to update the firmware for the device, which didn't take long, and then it walked me through a tutorial about how to use the software. For my iPad, I downloaded the software from the App Store and then paired the TourBox using Bluetooth. It was very easy to set up. The desktop version of the TourBox software comes with ready-made presets for well-known software, including Photoshop, Lightroom Classic Advanced, Premiere Editing, Premiere Color Grading, Capture One, Clip Studio Paint, Paint Tool Sai, DaVinci Resolve, CapCut and Toon Boom Harmony. Out of those software presets, the only one I have is Clip Studio Paint, so I tried that with the TourBox to get used to how it worked. I love the tactile feel of the knob, scroll wheel and dial, and they did the sort of things I expected them to in the program. The knob resizes the brushes, the dial rotates the page and the scroll wheel zooms in and out. These are functions I use all the time when painting, so it's great to have quick access to them. It helps with immersion and feels more fun. I don't have to switch to use my mouse if I need to scroll in or out. Alt and space being set to the lower right buttons is perfect because that's similar to where they are on my one-handed keyboard. Shift button is set to the top button, which is still easy to access as everything fits in the hand, and the 2 little round buttons are undo and redo, which seem logical and easy to remember. Control is on the side button. For this preset I noticed that holding down the button for shift or control sets the D-pad direction buttons to change to different functions. Key combinations are a useful feature of the TourBox, enabling quick access to lots of different functions. Apparently there are over 400 per preset. Over 150 button combinations can be made. well as clicking once on a button or keeping it pressed and using it with another button on a device, you can configure functions to use double click, release to trigger, repeat while the button is held down, and A/B mode. A/B mode sends the first command when the button is pressed and a second when it's released. As well as this, you can configure buttons to use macros or to use the Tour menu feature. Whilst getting used to using the TourBox, you can choose to show an overlay of the general buttons and an overlay for the D-pad buttons if you want. I discovered that these windows could also be dragged to my second monitor. I think this will be useful for using the TourBox between different software. It saves using a lot of sticky notes. I liked the default layout for the Clip Studio Paint preset, so after trying it out I decided to configure presets for my other 2D software to be as similar to that preset in terms of using the knob for brush size, dial for rotation, the scroll wheel for zooming in and out, short button for panning, tall button for colour picker, C1 and C2 for undo and redo. I made alterations for other buttons and the D-pad section in different software because they don't all have the same features, or I like to use them for different things. I set up presets for Krita, Rebelle, Leonardo, Affinity Photo and Designer. This helped me to familiarise myself with the TourBox software. I think setting shortcuts is a personal thing, and it also depends on how you use your software. It helped me learn more about the TourBox software, so it was a useful thing to do. I would recommend anyone to do it themselves, though it does take time and tweaking depending on how many presets you configure. If you use a software that already has ready-made presets, this will take less time because there are lots of shortcuts already available in the TourBox software, so you won't have to dig through program shortcuts as much. Most of the 2D painting software I use is quite similar regarding how they work. They have lots of defined shortcuts for the main functions I wanted to configure for the TourBox. I ran into a bit of a problem with Affinity Photo because the shortcuts for Rotate Page have to be configured first in Affinity Photo before you can set them on the dial in TourBox, which is not a problem with TourBox or Affinity, just something I thought I should mention. In Affinity Photo, the brush opacity controls are set to use numbers 1 to 9 instead of one key for lower opacity and another for increased opacity, which most of the other 2D software I use do. This made trying to use a knob combination to set opacity impossible for Affinity Photo, as the knob, scroll or dial only use one shortcut for going left or right, not a scale of values. Some programs like Leonardo use one shortcut for the rotation instead of one for going left and one for going right, so I couldn't use the dial on the TourBox for that software, but I set it to use the dial press down button instead, which was easy to remember as it's in the same place anyway. After I'd set up presets for my 2D software, I set up presets for my 3D software and animation software. I use ZBrush, 3D Coat and Blender for 3D work and Moho for 2D animation. Moho is a 2D animation program, so the shortcuts I configured were specific to how I use that software. I didn't set many functions on the TourBox because I generally use the user interface with this program rather than the shortcuts, but I did think using the dial to scrub the timeline was really cool. ZBrush, 3D Coat and Blender are 3D programs. I mainly use ZBrush for sculpting and 3D Coat for UV mapping and painting, although there are great sculpting tools in 3D Coat. Blender is very shortcut key heavy and does many different things in different modes, so it's hard to assign shortcuts for all the different modes in Blender on the TourBox. I decided to concentrate on using the TourBox for helping with my sculpting workflow in Blender, and I've assigned the press down on scroll wheel to be middle click, top button to be shift, and side button as zoom in and out, which will all help with navigation in Blender. I will still need to use my keyboard because I have to for things like 3D modelling and other tasks in Blender. The layouts for each preset for these programs were not exactly the same, but I kept some consistency between Blender, 3D Coat and ZBrush with the main buttons for sculpting tasks, and as well as this I can also use the buttons on my pen tablet to help with 3D navigation while I'm sculpting. I found the Tour menu feature very useful in Blender. I love having quick access to shortcuts I use without having to remember the keys all the time. I bought an iPad Air recently, so I tried the TourBox Elite Plus out with Procreate because the app for TourBox came with a ready-made preset. It comes with presets installed for Procreate, Clip Studio Paint, Final Cut Pro, LumaFusion, Art Studio Pro and presets for general functions on the iPad. Using the TourBox for Procreate was nice because I'm not used to using touchscreen for 2D painting coming from desktop. I prefer not to if possible because I don't like getting fingerprints all over the screen. It definitely felt easier and more natural to use Procreate on the iPad for me because of this, but if you are used to using touchscreen you might not need it. As Clip Studio Paint was on the desktop before the iPad, a lot of users who also want to work with the iPad version would probably find the TourBox very useful to keep consistency between devices as long as the shortcuts between the software presets are similar. I wondered if the Affinity Photo and Designer presets I've made on my PC would work with the iPad version of the apps, but the file formats were not the same between PC and iPad. You can download presets for the iPad version from the official TourBox website, which other users have shared, and then you have to share them with the TourBox app once they're downloaded in order for them to import into the program. The TourBox worked fine with Affinity Photo after finding a preset, but there's no way to rotate in the iPad app for this program. You have to check the app you want to use with the TourBox has the available shortcut features in order to be able to configure them for the TourBox. Not all the apps I have on the iPad seem to have configurable shortcuts. Unlike the desktop version, presets don't seem to automatically activate depending on which software you have open on the iPad. You have to manually open the TourBox app and then select the preset you want to use for the program you have open. I prefer the desktop version, which does have an option to switch automatically between programs, but I understand why this is the case with the iPad version, as there's no way to assign which program each preset is connected to, unlike on the desktop version. If you want to make presets for different apps on your iPad, you have to create a new general preset and then rename it to the software you want to use it for. You have to manually select it as the active preset. In theory, as long as your software has configurable shortcuts, this should be possible. However, from my experience, not all apps may work as well as others with the TourBox. I found that a preset I downloaded for use with Nomad worked okay for the buttons, but the dial, knob and scroll did not seem very responsive compared to when using my desktop software or Procreate on the iPad, so perhaps not all software will be 100% compatible yet. The TourBox is not really designed for 3D programs, and to be honest, Nomad is one of the programs I don't mind using the touchscreen with because it makes more sense and feels intuitive in terms of 3D navigation on the iPad. It also confirms my belief that it's best to configure your own shortcuts because I didn't like the one I downloaded for many of the functions, but it was useful in learning how things worked. I really like using the knob, dial and scroll on the TourBox. It helps make digital painting and 3D sculpting feel more natural, immersive and fun. The buttons look distinct from one another and feel different enough so that I know which ones I'm pressing without having to look down at the device. The TourBox has haptic features which can be turned on or off, and have 3 strength settings to make physical feedback even more apparent, and they create cute little clicking noises too. The strength of these features can be set for each function in a preset. The speed of the rotation for the knob, scroll and dial can also be configured for each function in a preset. Everything fits in my hand without having to move my wrist or look over to see where my hand is on the buttons like I've had to do on one-handed keyboards I've used in the past. I find the option to show the HUD overviews for each software really useful as well, and the tour menu feature is fantastic. I think the desktop software for the TourBox is easy to use and is packed with more than enough configuration options. It supports all the software used regularly on the desktop. The TourBox software for the iPad is easy to use as well, and as long as you use it with the ready-made presets it comes with, it will work great, but there might not be as much compatibility with other apps yet. The simulated gesture features of the iPad version are in beta, but it looks promising and seems to work. I don't use my iPad as much as my desktop PC, so this isn't really a problem for me, but if you only have an iPad and not a desktop computer, I would not get one of these unless you use the software that TourBox has already made presets for that have been tried and tested with the device. It is great for desktop users that also have an iPad or want to switch between 2 computers, and I think this is who the TourBox Elite Plus is made for. I think that over time, compatibility with apps on iPad for the TourBox Elite Plus will improve. It is something they are still developing. I think it's excellent with Procreate. Compared with the gaming keyboards I've used, the TourBox Elite Plus is certainly a big upgrade. The TourBox Elite Plus is definitely a premium solution for creative professionals as opposed to one-handed keyboards. I own a few one-handed keyboards. In comparison to TourBox, they are not as suited for creative software needs and not as ergonomic, although they still work with the TourBox connected, which is good because you can never have too many keyboards in my opinion. I don't know how I would fare without a full keyboard because I need it for using Blender and writing, but the TourBox Elite Plus is excellent for digital painting and sculpting workflows, so I'll definitely be using it. Thanks for watching.